Good morning. This hearing will come to order. I want to welcome everyone here today. This hearing is a follow-up to the one held last year around this same time on the VA academic affiliate relationship. Unfortunately, 1 year later, the same concerns persist, and VA appears to have not done anything to improve its position with the affiliate and make itself more of an equal partner. As I prepared for this hearing and reviewed the relevant information, the same two words kept popping into my head: oversight and accountability. Where are the oversight and the accountability? These are the two things constantly lacking with the VA, and this issue is no different. At the budget hearing held just 2 weeks ago, Secretary Shulkin was asked about the VA's research budget. His response was that VA research is very important and it needs to find ways to continue to invest in its research. Well, VA has an avenue that it is not properly utilizing, and that is the VA nonprofit corporations, or NPCs. These NPCs were set up to facilitate VA and promote VA research. Any money they collect by administering grants or awards is put directly back into the local VA medical center. Last year, they brought in over $250 million to VA research, but this number could be even greater. Also last year, NPCs paid salaries for institutional review board and R&D coordinators, purchased equipment, and paid bridge funding so that VA researchers could stay on at VA and continue their research while applying for other grants. By allowing researchers to stay on, VA could continue to receive the benefit of VA physician researchers seeing veteran patients. Despite this, many federal grants are being awarded and administered by academic affiliates, even when all research is being conducted in VA. So I am curious why, in so many cases, the affiliate is being allowed to administer awards and collect fees instead of the NPC, when doing so prevents this money from coming back to support VA. Think of what VA could be doing with this additional money. Wouldn't this be investing in VA research, as the Secretary noted? But again, the lack of oversight or accountability is letting this money slip through VA's fingers. VA also spends $731 million annually on the Graduate Medical Education, or GME program. But again, this is a question about the level of oversight and accountability, particularly about whether VA is getting what it is paying for. Numerous VA medical centers have no process in place for ensuring that residents and attendings are actually in the VA clinics and seeing patients. There is no mechanism for accounting for these doctors' time and attendance. Further, VA does not have a policy in place that mandates documentation from the affiliate so that each local facility is left to handle it as it sees fit. But whether or not VA receives proof of time and attendance, VA still pays the affiliate. In no other business would payment be made without proof of service. Yet VA seems to think nothing of ensuring this level of accountability. I am interested to hear from VA today on how it is ensuring that it is not losing out on what it is entitled to, and how VA is being fiscally responsible in these relationships. I'm also interested in hearing from the NPCs and how they could be better utilized. Either way, it is painfully obvious that reassessing these relationships in one of the many ways in which VA could better fulfill its research needs and help ensure research remains a critical component of VA care now and in the future. I now yield to Ranking Member Custer for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our panel for being with us. This afternoon, this subcommittee will delve into issues involving VA and academic affiliates. VA plays a vital role in our national healthcare delivery system. In 70 years of partnerships with its academic affiliates, the VA is the largest single provider of medical training in the United States. The largest single provider of medical training. Today, over 70% of healthcare providers throughout our civilian healthcare delivery system have received training through the VA. In partnership with its academic affiliates and VA nonprofit corporations, VA has also been a pioneer in the field of biomedical research. These are two very important topics, and I hope that my colleagues, and especially Chairman Bergman, will schedule future hearings on the subjects because there are so many important issues that we're trying to cover today, involving the training of healthcare providers, recruitment of providers, and VA research, that this hearing alone simply will not be enough. While our overall healthcare system reaps the benefits of the VA's education and training efforts, VA also benefits by being able to rely on additional providers and specialists who are on the leading edge of medical knowledge and leaders in their field of practice. This is especially important to the VA, which is facing a shortage of over 45,000 healthcare providers. In fact, it's estimated that there will be a nationwide shortage of between 40,000 and 105,000 physicians within the next decade. VA's relationship to its academic affiliates is essential if VA is to provide the level of health care that we all expect for our veterans. And that's why Congress, the VA, and the academic affiliates must work together to address areas that need improvement. We must do everything we can to make sure VA is able to fill all 1,500 graduate medical education slots that Congress authorized under the Choice Act. I want to understand what barriers exist to filling the slots and recruiting these future providers who are completing GME rotations in VA medical facilities. I look forward to discussing whether scholarship programs, debt reduction, and student loan forgiveness programs, and even incentives to foreign-trained providers completing residencies in the U.S. could be leveraged to fill the 45,000 provider vacancies at VA. Last Congress, I introduced the Grow Our Own Directive. We call it the GOOD Act, which would provide scholarships to veterans with military health experience to become physician assistants at the VA. I believe that programs like this should be considered because they can go a long way towards solving provider shortage and recruiting some of our best providers to care for veterans, military service members who themselves have experience providing health care to their fellow service members. I plan to introduce it again this Congress, and I would love to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to find the funding to support this pilot program so we can get it passed into law. I look forward to discussing some ways that the VA can improve its recruitment and retention of medical professionals completing GME and training at VA facilities. We need to find creative ways to incentivize providers to work at VA and provide care to veterans, particularly those who live in rural areas and medically underserved areas like my home state of New Hampshire. VA's GME program and legislation like the GOOD Act are types of the creative programming that we need. Our medically served rural communities struggle to retain quality medical providers, which hurts the quality of care in these communities. Of course, many of our nation's veterans call these underserved areas home, and that's particularly true in the northern and western parts of my state. It's critical that VA's GME program are mobilized to the greatest extent possible to help these shortages, and the same could be said for underserved urban areas. However, I remain concerned that rural and underserved VA facilities that may not have the infrastructure to support GME rotations are not doing more to build capacity or prioritize training for other providers that can be trained at these facilities. In New Hampshire, for example, we have a shortage of nursing assistants. These are providers who require less training than registered nurses, but are still critical for effective health care, especially palliative care, hospice, and nursing care. VA facilities can and should be working with their nonprofit research corporations and academic affiliates to train nursing assistants and other providers to serve rural communities. I know that the White River Junction VA Medical Center worked with its nonprofit research corporation to provide training to VA volunteers to provide palliative care services. And I want to highlight this as a success story. But I know that in other rural New Hampshire communities and across the country, VA facilities are struggling to fill provider vacancies and need to do more to use training resources and opportunities with our academic affiliates and nonprofit research corporations. I also wish to examine how we can better support VA research and research conducted by our academic affiliates and the VA nonprofit research corporations mentioned by Chairman Bergman. I'm concerned about the proposed $33 million cut in the Trump budget to the VA research programs and 18% cut in the National Institute of Health budget. If VA's current research budget is not keeping pace with inflation, and if NIH awards 5,000 to 8,000 fewer research grants, this will have a negative effect on VA's ability to develop treatment for our veterans. If funding for VA research continues to be cut, I want to know if it's possible to leverage private investment and nonprofit funding through our nonprofit research corporations, as suggested by Chairman Bergman, and through our academic affiliates. Finally, I want to ensure that VA is properly overseeing its research program and the administration of NIH-funded research through the VA nonprofit research corporations and academic affiliates. I want to better understand when is it appropriate for the VA nonprofit corporations and academic affiliates to administer the NIH grants and ensure that VA is following current policy directives. Last week, I participated in a symposium at the Dartmouth Geisel School of Medicine on addressing the New Hampshire opioid crisis. Clinicians and researchers from Dartmouth, the White River Junction VA Medical Center, NIH, and hospital systems across New Hampshire came together to discuss how we as a community can work together to address the opioid epidemic and effectively treat chronic pain, which affects so many of our veterans and communities across the country. I know that we have clinician researchers at VA medical centers and medical schools and teaching hospitals interested in developing effective treatments for both opioid addiction and alternative treatment for pain management. This is one of the many areas where VA should be leading the country in research to develop cutting-edge treatments to address the opioid epidemic and effectively treat and manage chronic pain. But these researchers need funding, whether through federal research grants or private nonprofit sources. We need to come together to figure out the best way to ensure this vital research is funded, it's administered properly, and so that this funding results in treatments that improve and in many cases will literally save veterans' lives. Educating our nation's healthcare providers and developing medical breakthroughs to provide treatment to our veterans are all part of the VA's core mission. And it's vital that we as members of Congress continue to support this mission. So thank you, Chairman Bergman, for scheduling this hearing. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Custer. I ask that all members waive their opening remarks as per this committee's custom. With that, I welcome the first and only panel that is now at the witness table. On the panel we have, and by the way, if I mispronounce your name, when you introduce yourself, please give me the correct pronunciation, please. We have Dr. Carolyn Clancy, Deputy Undersecretary for Health for Organizational Excellence. She is accompanied by Dr. Rachel Ramoni, Chief of Research and Development Officer for VHA, and Dr. Karen Sanders, Deputy Chief of Academic Affiliations Officer for VHA. We also have Mr. Rick Stars, Chief Executive Officer for the National Association of Veterans Research and Education Foundations. He is accompanied by Ms. Nancy Watterson Diorio, Executive Director of the Boston VA Research Institute. Finally, we have Dr. Christopher Colenda, President Emeritus of the West Virginia University Health System, who is here representing the Association of American Medical Colleges. I ask the witnesses to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please be seated, and let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Dr. Clancy, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Custer, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss VA's research program and our relationship with academic affiliates. As you noted, I'm accompanied by Drs. Ramoni and Sanders. For more than 90 years, VA research has contributed to many of the medical treatments and diagnostic tools in use today, including the CAT scan, cardiac pacemakers, and state-of-the-art prosthetic limbs. These achievements have resulted in 3 Nobel Prizes, 7 Lasker Awards, and numerous other honors. VA research continues to drive advances in veteran care in areas as diverse as diabetes, spinal cord injury, mental health, and of course our groundbreaking Million Veterans Program. In establishing the VA research program, Congress recognized both the need to study the unique needs of veterans and the opportunity for research to support excellent clinical care. VA research plays a unique role that cannot be filled by external funding sources. 60% of our researchers are also practicing clinicians at our medical centers. Unlike other federal agencies, VA has no laboratories whose predominant function is research. Instead, research studies are performed in parallel and in close proximity to where patient care is provided. This leads to a focus on research that benefits veterans, conducted by employees who are dedicated to the mission of improving care for veterans. Our close partnership with universities allows VA researchers to be part of a much larger network of scientists and to leverage laboratory space, equipment, and expertise that may be more readily available at the university affiliate. VA research fosters dynamic collaborations with its university partners, other federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, and private industry. In 2017, VA researchers were able to leverage $673 million in VA funding to bring in an additional $595 million in external funding from industry and federal agencies such as the National Institutes of Health and Department of Defense. The federal investment in VA research then returns incredible value to veterans and the taxpayers, which is reflected in veterans' positive attitudes about research and health outcomes in VA. VA-affiliated research and education corporations, also known as NPCs, or not-for-profit corporations, were established by the Congress in 1988. Currently, there are 84 NPCs located throughout the U.S. and Puerto Rico. After paying their own administrative expenses, they have collectively contributed $2.2 billion to VA research over the past decade. They employ approximately 2,800 people, serve 2,300 researchers, and administer 3,500 research projects. NPCs are established at VA medical centers and are state-chartered nonprofit corporations governed by boards of directors, overseen by the VHA Nonprofit Program Oversight Board. Oversight is accomplished through routine triennial on-site reviews, follow-up of past reviews, for-cause audits and investigations, the NPC annual report to Congress, education and training sessions, and ad hoc consultations. January 30th of 2016 marked the 70th anniversary of what we call VA Policy Memorandum No. 2, a document crafted by General Omar Bradley and other VA leaders, establishing the visionary partnership between VA and America's medical schools. As the ranking member noted, approximately 70% of U.S. physicians have had some part of their training in a VA facility, which means that VA is really profoundly important to medical education in this country. Many of these doctors first learned how to use an electronic health record at VA. VA is affiliated with well over 90% of Doctor of Medicine and Doctor of Osteopathy granting medical schools, and our health profession education activities include affiliations with over 1,800 other schools. So that means that over 127,000 trainees received supervised clinical education in VA facilities in 2016 alone. The VA and its academic affiliates are partners striving together for excellence in delivering the best health care to our veterans. Under the authority of the 2014 Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act Graduate Medical Education Expansion Program, VA is bringing new doctors in training, targeting primary care and psychiatry to the rural and underserved areas where many of our veterans reside. VA appreciates the support of Congress in authorizing this initiative for 10 years, precisely so that some of these facilities can build the capacity that the ranking member noted. We appreciate Congress' support, which allows us to train future medical researchers and clinicians to care for veterans in the nation as a whole. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony, and my colleagues and I would be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Clancy. Mr. Stars, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Bergman, Congresswoman Kuster, esteemed subcommittee members. Thank you for the invitation to be here today to share with you our thoughts regarding the VA's medical research program and the role in that program of the congressionally authorized VA-affiliated nonprofit research and education corporations, NPCs. My name is Rick Stars, and I have served as the Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Veterans Research and Education Foundations, commonly known as NAVREF, since January 2016. I am a proud Army veteran, having served on active duty as a Medical Service Corps officer for 26 years, culminating as the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army Medical Research and Materiel Command. I was honored to join NAVREF and transition from a career supporting the health needs of soldiers to one supporting the health needs of all veterans. I am accompanied by Ms. Nancy Waterson-Diorio, a member of NAVREF's Board of Directors and the Chief Executive Officer of the Boston VA Research Institute, Incorporated, BAVARI. Nancy has led BAVARI for 21 years, building it from a $100,000 startup organization in 1996 to a $14 million research enterprise today. Her experience, expertise, and leadership have been invaluable to NAVREF, and I am happy to have her at my side. NAVREF is the 501c3 nonprofit membership organization of research and education foundations affiliated with VA medical centers. These nonprofits were authorized by Congress under Title 38 to provide flexible funding mechanisms for the conduct of research and education at VA facilities nationwide. Basically, our corporations enable VA medical centers and their researchers to leverage their programs with funds from foundations and companies that the VA could not otherwise accept. The VA does not control our nonprofits, but Title 38 and the VHA handbooks give the VA responsibility for oversight of their activities. NAVREF's mission is simple. We exist to advance the success of the nonprofits. I'm here today on behalf of the NAVREF board and our membership to tell you about the great work of these nonprofits, our potential for greater contributions, and areas where we face challenges. NAVREF envisions a nation in which veterans receive the finest care based on innovative research and education. Over the last 4 years, the NPCs administered over $1 billion in support of VA research and education activities. Our member foundations have recently administered and funded research and education projects for veterans in the areas of PTSD, mental health, precision medicine, and palliative care, among many areas. As flexible funding mechanisms, the NPCs offer a multitude of services and benefits to VA research and education programs. These include renovating and upgrading VA research infrastructure, providing funds, staffing, and training support to VA research and institutional review boards, paying expenses related to recruitment of research investigators to the VA system, providing seed grants to new investigators to aid them in establishing their VA research careers, underwriting bridge funding for VA investigators who are between research grant awards, and procuring personnel, equipment, and supplies for VA-approved research and education projects. NAVREF is encouraged by the approach of the VA's new Chief Research and Development Officer, Dr. Rachel Ramoni. In the short time she has been in her position, Dr. Ramoni has reached out to NAVREF and the NPC community on multiple occasions to share information and seek partnership opportunities. She has a strong interest in bringing more clinical trials to veterans and understands the key role the nonprofits play in fostering these relationships with pharmaceutical companies and the clinical trial industry. Secretary Shulkin and other leaders at the VA speak often about the need to partner with private industry to tap into the great ideas and willing contributors in the private sector. This is the role that the NPCs were designed to play and where we offer so much potential to the VA. NAVREF strongly believes the NPCs offer tremendous benefits to veterans, but they are not being used to their maximum potential. NAVREF offers 3 recommendations. First, VA should establish clear guidelines for the administration of extramural research activities that offer the NPC the right of first refusal for all research efforts where the majority of this work occurs physically within the VA. Included in these guidelines should be a common practice for vetting conflicts of interest and ensuring those involved in the decision-making process are not conflicted. Second, VA should review the appropriate level of oversight required to ensure the nonprofit corporations are operating appropriately and effectively while retaining their independence as nonprofit entities legislated to be flexible mechanisms outside of the federal bureaucracy. Third, the National Institutes of Health should modify its grants policy statement to allow our NPCs to pay VA clinicians as principal investigators on the Institute's research grants for their off-tour of duty effort. Ultimately, NAVREF and the NPCs share the same goals as the VA, to improve the lives of veterans. We only exist to facilitate and support the VA's research and education programs. My fellow executive directors and board members, many of whom are here today in the audience, are honored to devote our personal and professional energies to facilitate scientific breakthroughs that can change the lives of veterans, their family members, and all Americans. With your continued support, the NPCs will make even more powerful contributions to the VA research and education programs and the veterans they serve. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stars. Dr. Colenda, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Custer and members of the subcommittee. I am representing today the Association of American Medical Colleges, which is a nonprofit organization of the 147 accredited U.S. medical schools and nearly 400 teaching hospitals in this country, many of which are VA medical centers. I am Dean Emeritus of the Texas A&M College of Medicine and former Chancellor for Health Sciences at West Virginia University and President Emeritus of the West Virginia University Health System. My specialty is geriatric psychiatry and public health. My testimony today focuses on the specific question posed by the VA subcommittee on oversight and investigation, VA and academic affiliates, who is benefiting now? Who benefits from these relationships? Simply put, veterans. Since the end of World War II, the VA and academic medicine have partnered to improve veterans' health through delivery of complex clinical care, medical and health professional education, and collaborating on veteran-centric research designed to positively impact veterans' health. We firmly believe that without the synergistic 70-year partnership with academic medicine, the VA's ability to fulfill its 3 statutory missions of patient care, research, and education would be limited. Now, residency training, also known as GME, is conducted within the VA, is high quality, and conforms to expectations and standards set forth by the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, or the ACGME. ACGME sets general institutional standards and residency-specific competencies that guide graduate medical education. ACGME insists upon multiple training experiences in order to ensure that future physicians possess clinical competencies to treat diverse patient populations. The VA training sites fall under the accreditation sponsorship of medical schools and teaching hospitals and are an important clinical setting to acquire the technical and cultural competencies to treat veterans. Through a variety of mechanisms, the VA and sponsoring institutions ensure accountability for the quality of residency training experiences. For example, the VA mandates that sponsoring institutions maintain accreditation with the ACGME. Surveys of both residents and faculty are conducted annually to ensure program effectiveness. Time and attendance reporting of the VA and CMS is well documented, and there are policies and procedures in place to remedy resident clinical performance and professionalism problems should they arise. In response to the nationwide physician workforce shortages, the U.S. needs to train more doctors. The AAMC appreciates the additional 1,500 GME slots that the VA has been authorized. However, most residents spend about 1/3 of their time in the VA, and the remaining 2/3 of time throughout other rotations with their clinical affiliates, so the VA cannot go it alone. Unfortunately, GME growth at academic affiliates has been stymied by caps on Medicare support by the Balanced Budget Act of 1997. To address this issue, the AAMC endorses the Resident Physician Shortage Reduction Act of 2017, which would allow Medicare to support 15,000 new slots over 5 years and to provide a preference for teaching 15,000 new slots over 5 years, which would allow teaching hospitals that are affiliated with VAs. Additionally, the VA encourages Congress to establish a mechanism to provide VA and Medicare funding for the 1,500 residents while they rotate through teaching hospitals that are already above the Medicare cap. Beyond increasing GME, the VA can adopt existing federal public service programs tied to medical school and residency training to help recruit and retain physicians and future VA leaders in their careers. Successful models that the VA could emulate include the DoD's Health Professional Scholarship Program, the National Health Service Corps, the Conrad 30 Visa Waiver Program for immigrating physicians, and the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences partnership with the Public Health Service. As you know, the history of research within the VA is a source of national pride that is focused on the needs of successive generations of veterans. We need to have sustainable funding for future needs for research addressing veterans' health care needs. And the academic medical centers have been and continue to be a high-valued partner for VA research enterprise. Among the many benefits include expert peers, research libraries, IT support, grants management expertise, IRB and other animal oversight care committees, which may not be necessarily found within the VA. We also support ways to overcome bureaucratic barriers that limit the effectiveness of the VA academic medical center collaboration. For example, to reduce duplicative compliance training at both VA and AMC affiliates. For example, human subject privacy, data security, and animal care training modules. Because NIH award administration is dependent upon a variety of local factors, the AMC believes that administration of NIH awards should be determined at the local level, and VA should use the time and effort reporting system for faculty researchers should use the same time and effort reporting system for faculty researchers as NIH, other federal agencies, and university-affiliated schools. And last, the AAMC and its members are proud of our clinical affiliations and clinical services agreements with local and regional VA centers. The AMC recommends several things to preserve and enhance these relationships. First, retain academic affiliations as a part of the core network of VA care. Streamline the processing for direct contracting with academic affiliates by eliminating or raising the $500,000 review trigger to more align with current clinical cost. Develop pre-approved and national templates, and also set standardized overhead rates to eliminate unnecessary negotiations and contract delays. And finally, the Enhanced Veterans Healthcare Act of 2017 would improve joint ventures with academic affiliates for healthcare resources, including space and equipment. We believe that the VA is at a crossroad. This is a time of great opportunity for the VA and academic medicine to reaffirm our commitment to serving those who have served this nation. The AMC and its member institutions will continue to work with Congress and the VA to find effective solutions moving forward. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Colenda. The written statements of those who have just provided oral testimony will be entered into the hearing record. We will now proceed with questioning, and I'd like to open up the questioning. Dr. Clancy, what is the role of your office as it relates to research and development and academic affiliations, and do either of these offices report directly to you?
So my office has a very important role under the heading of organizational excellence that includes a great deal of oversight and assessing and improving the integrity of our operations throughout the healthcare system. My closest working relationship on a day-to-day basis is with the Office of Research and Development, in part because our other strong function is actually developing and implementing strategies to improve care for veterans as rapidly as possible. And a big part of the Office of Research has a very strong research partner, right? If you implement a program and it looks like things got better, you'd like to know that it will work every place that people try it and so forth. So that's been a very strong relationship. In addition to that, I serve by virtue of my background in research. I ran a research agency at HHS before coming to VA. As the central office official for our institutional IRB, which actually reviews grants for multi-site studies, which is an increasingly big part of our research program, and one we've had some very good conversations with NAVREF about.
Okay. Do they report directly to you or not?
No, they do not.
Okay. Dr. Ramoni, I understand you are new to your position and have done several site visits. In learning about VA research locally, do you think that the relationship with the academic affiliates is unbalanced, with researchers favoring university and not the NPCs for administering research?
Thank you, Chairman Bergman, for your question. I am new to my role. I've been here in this position for about 5 months, drawn to it by the mission to serve veterans in our country by serving veterans. I've performed so far 6 site visits in my 4.5 months, and what I've learned is that there is an individual relationship at each one of those sites between the NPC, the academic affiliate, and the VA Medical Center. I've heard anecdotes about one being preferred over the other, and because of that, we are going to undertake an independent review of all of the different relationships at all of the different 84 sites where we have a nonprofit, an academic affiliate, and a VA medical center to better get a handle on what is happening at each one of those sites, moving beyond anecdotes to data on the whole system.
Thank you. Again, Dr. Ramoni, what are the benefits of having VA NPCs administer federal funding to research studies?
So there are several benefits. So grants come in different types. Sometimes a grant is a total cost grant. That means the money they give you, if they give you $100, that has to include your overhead costs plus the money you're going to use for research. When you have lower overhead costs, it means you have more money for research. Because the nonprofits typically have lower operating expenses, that means it leaves more money for research when you put it through a nonprofit, when you have a total cost grant. Now, not all grants are total cost grants. Some grants just give you $1 for research, and on top of it, they give you your overhead costs. So that's one of the benefits. Another benefit is that there's a really close working relationship with a nonprofit. Oftentimes, the nonprofits are on site at the VA. When I visited Pittsburgh and I visited Chicago, for instance, they are actually on site and have clinical research facilities on site. In addition, the nonprofits also administer IPAs, which allow hiring of personnel that would be difficult at the VA very quickly through the nonprofit.
Thank you. Ms. Watterson de Orio, what advantages do you see in having the NPCs administer the research awards conducted at the VA?
Thank you for your question, Chairman Bergman. I believe that the advantages of VA NPCs administering such awards are that the VA NPCs exist solely to support veterans research. We are there, as Dr. Ramoni said, most of us on site, available to answer and be available for pre-award and post-award counseling, expertise, and the dollars that are available through our organizations are exclusively used for research and the missions that you were talking about in your opening, as well as what Dr. Clancy and Rick also mentioned about being able to support back to the VA. All the dollars are there for the VA.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. Ranking Member Custer is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. This is aimed for Dr. Colenda, but if anyone else has anything to add. I've been very involved with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in a task force to combat the heroin epidemic. And a lot of this, I think we have an opportunity to work with the VA and with the medical schools. We had research at our task force recently from experts that medical education curricula lacks focus on pain management, substance use disorder, and complementary or alternative medicine, particularly with regard to chronic pain. And first, if you know this information, could you describe those components of medical education? And then I'd like to get into if the VA could help us lead the way to better research, but also actually changing the education of our medical professionals.
Thank you, ma'am, for asking that question, because I think it does get to the heart of the current epidemic of opioid addiction in this country and the adaptation of medical school and graduate medical education curricula to address that issue. I would say that because of the increased awareness of opiate addiction, that at the undergraduate medical education level, that is in the first 4 years of school, there has been a rapid adoption of curriculum that addresses both the basic science and the clinical science of opiate addiction to help improve and give competencies to medical students to be able to understand the addiction problem that's found. As we move into graduate medical education, there is increasing focus on appropriate prescribing practices for pain management in the peri-surgical post-operative period, as well as for those of us who are in psychiatry and behavioral health to better understand the treatment paradigms and the best practices available for reducing opiate dependence for those people who are already addicted. As you move into continuing medical education, many states are now implementing program modules for continuing medical education, which requires physicians to be able to document in their CME profile that they have had additional expertise in substance abuse and prescribing practices. So it's a curriculum that builds upon itself. It is relatively new because the awareness of the epidemic is new, but I believe that medical education across the continuum is beginning to address this in a more effective way.
Yeah, I would very much like to work with you going forward, because one of the things we're considering is more of a national standard to make sure that everybody gets up to speed quickly.
If I could just add briefly,
Sure.
Although Dr. Ramoni reminded us that the plural of anecdotes is not data.
Yes.
I do know of a number of instances where some of our experts in VA facilities have been hugely helpful to academic counterparts, particularly confronting an acute situation. And frankly, thanks to the support that we've received from the Congress through the Care, Addiction, and Recovery Act, I actually think this is a potentially very exciting landscape for even more collaboration between VAs and academic medical centers.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just to get to me of the matter, under the Choice Act, you talked about the VA residency training program was increased by 1,500 positions, and I think this actually probably goes to Dr. Colenda or Dr. Clancy. My understanding is only 547 have been awarded, and I'm wondering what's impairing VA's ability to get the new positions out the door, and do you need our help to make this happen?
Just before I hand this to Dr. Sanders, who knows all the details very well, I will simply say that in your opening statement, Congresswoman, you actually referenced the need for the right infrastructure in rural and underserved areas, and that has been a very strong focus of the Office of Academic Affiliations. So we share the excitement that created this opportunity, and I will turn it to my esteemed colleague.
Thank you, Dr. Clancy. We agree that we have allocated 547 positions after 3 rounds of the VACA GME expansion. That third round of residents will not start until July 1st of this year. So really, we're still very early into this, this process. The legislation was only passed less than 3 years ago, and we've had to build a process of going to rural and underserved VAs, finding academic partners, planning and then building residency programs that then get accredited, as Dr. Colenda mentioned, and then putting in place the capacity at those small VAs to have faculty, to have an education office, to have protected time, to have computers and team rooms and all the things that make a program run. So I believe actually that the 547 positions is very good news, but we do thank you for extending the initiative to 10 years. Thank you.
Great. We're happy to work with you going forward to make sure you have the resources, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Arrington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Clancy, help me understand the research operation there. How much of the research done is contracted out or outsourced to an affiliate like a university versus internal? Is it 100% or is it some mix?
So all of the research that we fund from VA It's an intramural program, which means that it goes to VA investigators. Now, many of our investigators, I mentioned that 60% are practicing clinicians in our system. In order to qualify for grant funding, physicians have to have a 5/8 appointment. That is to say, a little over half their time dedicated to work at the VA. Many of them also have another appointment in a department at the university affiliate, a situation they find very, very rewarding because they have great colleagues on both sides, if you will.
Would you change that construct? Would you change it for more flexibility? Or is there any changes to that mix that would help us in pursuit of better research opportunities and outcomes?
The one other thing I should have just mentioned was our investigators can and do apply to other federal and private sources for external support. That is the $595 million figure that I mentioned in the testimony, where our investment was $673 million, but that leveraged, if you will, an additional $595 million from other sources.
Like NIH, NSF, et cetera?
And defense, yes.
The indirect costs versus direct research, are the indirect costs the same or similar to the NIH and other research programs within the federal government?
VA cannot get indirect costs directly. That's why the role of the not-for-profit corporations is very, very helpful. It is, as the Congress designed it, a very flexible funding vehicle in that way. We can't actually accept the indirect costs for these grants directly to the VA. The rate that we get tends to be lower than most university affiliates. So I believe that it's about 27%, as opposed to 50% or higher for most academic affiliates. And Dr. Colenda, if that's hyperbole at all, please let me know. But in general, the rate is lower for us.
In terms of research dollars, has it gone up, down, or flat over the last 3 to 5 years?
Dr. Ramoni?
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. It had been flat, and then we had an increase in the 2017 budget, primarily due to funding given to the Million Veteran Program for sequencing, for genetic sequencing of individuals in the Million Veteran Program. And you've seen in the President's budget a decrease is proposed.
To whom do you report the outcomes of that research?
So the outcomes of the research are reported in several ways because they have different impacts. To the scientific community, they're reported through scientific journals. To the health professions community, also reading the scientific journals, we add professional conferences. I was just in Chicago where they had the clinical oncology meeting. We also have connections to the VA itself, obviously.
Well, let me make it clear,
please,
but
yeah.
As a fiduciary, do you report your outcomes to this committee or to the VA committee when you're justifying more investment in research because of the efforts, the success rates, the discoveries? Who do you justify it to as a fiduciary of the dollars that you have in research?
That's a very good question. I don't believe we currently formally report our outcomes, but I will take that for the record to confirm. I want to get you the right answer.
Thank you. And then who sets the agenda, the research agenda?
So the agenda, like NIH, some of the agenda is set by the investigators. And I want to point out that the investigators, the people applying for the grants, are 60% of them are clinicians. So they are people working with veterans who know the needs of the veterans firsthand. So they apply for awards and we fund them on the basis of their merit. In addition, we have targeted grants. So for instance, our largest area of funding is, some of our largest areas of funding are aging, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, suicide prevention, areas that you would expect that are of great importance to veterans. So some of the agenda is set centrally, but we allow the investigators to respond to needs that they're seeing on the ground to apply for grants independent of that agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I know I'm out of time, but would you mind circulating the answer to the question about outcomes and the fiduciary accountability.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So if I could just make one friendly amendment. The fiduciary accountability in terms of did the money go to the researchers and was it actually spent on research, that gets reported through the budget process, and we would be happy to follow up with you or anyone else in your staffs for a briefing. The actual outcomes may be some period of time downstream. You know, investments in genetics today are probably not going to be able to tell you about in October when the new fiscal year starts, but it will have payoffs downstream. Similarly, big successes that you might hear about on the news or newspaper, wherever, probably are the results of investments made a bit of time ago.
Thank you. Mr. Sablon is recognized next for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I'm from the Northern Mariana Islands, and which is designated as a health profession shortage area. Unfortunately, because we don't have a teaching university, our hospital, our only hospital, actually don't even qualify for the J1 program. We've tried looking into that. But what would have to be done to create an affiliation between our hospital and the VA and establish a GME program? One, I also understand that the Veteran Administration offers planning grants and infrastructure grants to help with establishing affiliations and filling slots. Could those funds be available to help the Northern Mariana set up the program there?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. In our Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Initiative, we have 3 levels and types of funding, as you've said. The first level of funding is the planning grant, where we pay the VA to protect the time of an individual so they can go out and seek academic partners to begin to plan for GME. These planning grants usually are awarded 3 to 5 years before the first resident might ever start. The second level of funding, as you've suggested, is the infrastructure component. That usually is awarded between 0 and 2 years before a resident is supposed to start. And that's the grant that actually builds capacity at the local VA. They already have an academic partner that's willing to send trainees, and now we have to build up the faculty, protect their time, make sure the support staff are in place, and make sure the patient population and everything else is ready to go. And then the third component of funding is the residency funding itself. And yes, we'd be happy to work with you, sir.
And you're saying even if we don't have a teaching university, it's possible?
Right. I would say there are flexible mechanisms, and we would look to find you a partner, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Poliquin is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and thank you all very much for being here. Dr. Clancy, I'd like to start my questioning with you, if I may, please. Walk me through an example, if you don't mind, of the great research that is done on behalf of our veterans, both at the VA and at outside affiliates. And I believe a type of outside affiliate that you have a relationship with, the VA does, are universities, correct? Okay, my alma mater is Harvard, so I'm not picking on Harvard, but we use them as an example. Okay, so let's say there's a $3 million grant that Harvard or somebody at Harvard, an employee there or a professor there says, we need a grant to do specific research on how to put in a pacemaker better than has been done in the past. They apply to the VA for a grant, correct?
If they have an investigator who has a 5/8 appointment, they can apply to VA.
Okay, so there's some mechanism that I don't understand, but that's okay. There's some mechanism for Harvard to apply to the VA for a grant.
Yes.
Okay, let's say the grant is $3 million. Okay, and does all $3 million of that dollars, taxpayer dollars, that are designed specifically to help our veterans, does that go to the research, 100% of it?
So our program, Congressman, is an intramural program, and generally we are funding VA investigators. Many of those investigators, in your example, might have appointments at Harvard as well. So where the money flows, a lot of that is going to depend on how much it is done at Harvard or sites outside
Okay,
of
so
VA.
let's stop there for a minute, Dr. Clancy. I'll make sure I understand this. Is that Harvard can get a $3 million grant?
No,
Okay, Harvard can apply for a $3 million grant?
no.
Keep going.
An individual investigator who has an
Who's
appointment.
it? Does the investigator work for the VA?
Yes.
Okay,
has
it's an
to work
employee
for
at the VA.
Yes.
And what do they investigate?
Say they are investigating, I'll use a landmark study, whether it makes a difference to treat moderately high
Okay,
blood
so,
pressure.
so there's someone at the VA that's responsible for placing these grants?
Yes.
Okay, so they decide that Harvard is worthy to receive a $3 million grant for some reason?
No, we are not funding Harvard. All of our money goes to research done for veterans.
Okay, okay, I understand that, but if the research is done, if Harvard is applying for the grant, then Harvard is not doing the research?
Harvard can't apply for a grant. We would tell them, we're sorry, we only fund investigators who work at VA. Now, a researcher who has an appointment with us, works a little over half his or her time with the VA, and also has an appointment, say they're a professor at Harvard,
Okay.
can apply for a grant. Not only that, they may need some of the time of some people who only work at Harvard, and that would be done through sort of a subcontract.
Okay, so however the work is dispensed from the VA to the people that do the research, how much is spent on the research, how much is spent on overhead administrative cost?
How much overhead? We don't do overhead, do we? We actually don't provide overhead costs from the money that we invest in research. If one of,
Is there any of that $3 million, as an example, doctor, that is spent on administrative overhead?
no,
There is not?
no, no. In fact, our clinician investigators, their core salaries are paid by the facility they work for. That does not come out of the research grant.
Oh, so you're saying, if I understand this correctly, and I can't possibly understand the roadmap that goes from the taxpayer to the VA to getting the research done. You're saying right now that there is no overhead and the money dispensed from the VA to do this medical research is 100% spent on medical research. Is that correct?
Yes, and in fact, it is supplemented because our facilities invest in the core salaries of the people who do the work. And for many, many research investments, a huge investment is the time that people devote to the work.
Talk to me a little bit about the internal process in these investigators again. How does that work?
Like any other research institution, like National Institutes of Health and so forth, if I'm an investigator and I have a brilliant idea, whether or not I have an appointment at Harvard, I write up a grant application, and it is submitted through a formal process, and it is reviewed by scientific peers. That has been the longstanding standard of how we evaluate whether this application is promising, and frankly, whether a group of well-established and recognized scientists believe that I, the investigator, can actually accomplish the work that I have laid out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Are we going to have a second round of questioning? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Tucano, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Custer, for allowing me to be present on a committee I don't formally serve on. I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to hear more about graduate medical school education at the VA. I was proud to have a part in championing the 1,500 residencies in the Choice Act during the conference committee phase, and I'm thrilled that a dozen slots have been awarded to the Inland Empire region of Southern California and my community. In fact, I met last week with psychiatry residents, and as we know, psychiatrists are in short supply at the VA and also in the general population in many parts of our country. I want to just reach out to my Republican friends on the committee, especially from rural states. I really believe that the GME opportunities we have here are part of a solution to our shortages in rural communities. In fact, I met last week with the psychiatry residents at UC Riverside School of Medicine who will be getting part of their training thanks to the VA. I want to continue along Ms. Custer's line of questioning. Dr. Clancy, is the VA on track to filling all 1,500 slots by 2024, or we're going to need to pass another extension?
Thank you for that question, sir. We believe within the 10-year milestones that we'll be able to fill the 1,500 slots. The first round, if you remember, we awarded about 200 positions, and we believe that was from pent-up demand for residency positions, especially in psychiatry and primary care. And the second round, we had a dip, about 168 or so, and don't quote those exact numbers. But now we're seeing an uptick, and in fact, we've just opened the fourth round of awards, and we're seeing over 250 applications for new positions. So we've worked very hard in my office over the last 2 years to build this capacity out in the rural and underserved areas and at the small VAs, and we think it's bearing fruit already, and we're seeing that in the number of applications.
I didn't realize that it took such amount of time for the rural areas and the underserved areas to actually gear up and ramp up to be able to take advantage of this. And in some ways, I'm glad that the bulk of these residencies didn't go to the pre-existing strong areas. I mean, we really got to find. That's my concern, is that we make sure the opportunities that we have here are spread around.
Right. I think, so the goal was not to get to 1,500 as fast as we could. I totally agree with you. If that was the case, we probably could have spread them around very fast within 5 years. But the goal was really to meet the legislative intent, which was to concentrate on primary care and mental health, which is what the country needs, and to also distribute GME into rural and underserved areas and assist the VA and their communities around the VAs with the workforce pipeline that they need and deserve.
I represent an urbanizing area, but many of what we call red states and rural areas, they're in great need of these residencies, and many of our veterans move to rural areas because they prefer them. It's less stressful, less noisy, and we've got to find ways to get these medical professionals into these rural areas, and we know that residencies, where they do their residencies, give a 60% chance that resident will become a doctor in that community and stay in that community. And I think this is an amazing opportunity. Apart from increasing the medical GME caps, which is outside of the jurisdiction of this committee, what else can we do to fill these slots?
I think we have focused on the Medicare cap as a major barrier to expansion of VACA, basically because of the lack of funding at our academic affiliates due to the Medicare cap. They're unwilling to either start up or expand new residency programs, and I might turn it over to Dr. Colenda to comment more about that.
In the United States, as well as the fundamental funding challenges that academic health systems and teaching hospitals face. Since 1997, and most of the expansion of residency slots have been out of hospital operating revenues. So resident slots have increased since 1997, but it's been funded by the health systems. And so when the VA...
You say health system, you're talking about
hospitals.
Hospital themselves.
Hospitals, right.
Because there's been a cap on the Medicare funding.
A cap on the Medicare funding. So at West Virginia University Health System, we were well over 110 or so slots above our GME cap that was set in 1997. We paid for those positions out of our hospital operating revenue. So when you have an influx of new resident slots, and because of the accreditation requirements for multiple training sites to round out a resident's training expectations, sometimes it's very difficult to incorporate that infusion of money from one sector without having an appropriate amount of increased funding in the other side of the balance sheet, so to speak, for residency funding. So it takes time for hospital systems to adjust in terms of raising the total number of positions available so that the residents who are principally getting their funding from the VA may also have the opportunity to experience training in other sites that are necessary to meet the ACGME requirements for training and the residency review
competencies.
I understand we'll have a second round of questions. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry I went over my time.
Before I recognize Dr. Rowe for questions, Mr. Takano brought up a good procedural point. Unless I hear an objection, I ask unanimous consent that Mr. Takano be allowed to continue participating in the hearing should he decide to do so. Hearing none, welcome. No problem. Dr. Rowe, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm totally confused now. What just went on?
We had an interloper.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the witnesses for being here today and to address this very important topic. And we've heard from many facilities that there may be undue pressure on VA by university affiliates. The leverage, of course, is that the affiliate provides personnel that are needed by the facility, and the facilities are afraid of losing the trainees. On the flip side, however, without the VA facility, affiliates would lose essential educational opportunities. While I realize that VA-university relationship is crucial, VA staff should not have to choose what's best for our veterans while being pressured by an affiliate. Further, it appears that at many facilities, no process exists for determining trainee presence, or the affiliates are not cooperative with the faculty, with facility education service chiefs. For instance, during a site visit at one facility, committee staff was told that the affiliate refused to provide documentation of resident attendance and that the facility was afraid of actions the affiliate might take if they pushed them. At other facilities, the affiliate did not get paid unless there was proof of attendance. So there appears to be a wide disparity in what should be a consistent process across all facilities. While I understand the educational mission of VA, we are mindful that GME programs are supported by tax dollars, and these dollars, although they support education, should also support veteran care. With that in mind, I have a couple of questions, and I've also worked at our university, and we have a very close relationship with the VA at our medical school there at East Tennessee State Quillen College of Medicine. Why, and anyone can take this, but why is there such a disparity in the approaches from one facility to another? Why isn't there consistency?
Thank you for that question, sir. There should not be inconsistencies. Our policies are very clear when it comes to the documentation that's necessary to support an invoice from an academic affiliate for resident time and attendance. Policies have been in existence for over 10 years, to my knowledge, that are very detailed and require the VA to have independent records before they will pay an invoice.
So, but that's clearly not happening. We found that it wasn't. So what's the penalty when you, for instance, on resident, that's a pretty simple thing. I mean, if you're getting paid, the resident, you should be able to document that resident was at the facility working.
And there's really no problem documenting a resident's working because they're usually seeing patients and writing notes in the electronic record. In fact, there are multiple oversight processes in the resident tracking processes. Some of the oversight processes are at the national level in my office. Some of the oversight processes are at the local level. But I think the principle of resident education is that—
wait, let's stop. Sorry. I understand all the policies are there. But it's not happening. So what happens when it doesn't happen? And whose responsibility is it to see that it is happening? And what are the consequences when it doesn't? That's what my question is. Not
right,
that the policies are there. I know they're there.
Right. So basic fiscal processes require that an invoice be matched up with some documentation of what you receive, even if it's a piece of machinery or a service. So these are core fiscal processes that should be working, and I'm sorry that there's an example that it didn't.
And if they don't, what happens?
Right. So ultimately, these are fiscal processes that are enforced and overseen at the local fiscal medical center level.
Okay, but what happens?
So if I hear at the national level that there's a problem with resident activity tracking, we actually go in and do a site visit, and we look at their processes. We tell them the benchmarks and the requirements and the standards.
Where has that happened, Dr. Stone?
Where has that happened? Several sites, sir. I can get the names to you.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And again, the second question, just dovetailing on that, can you assure us moving forward that there's a consistent accounting of resident time to ensure that GME dollars are being spent appropriately?
Yes, and that gets back to the answer before, which is that resident time is highly choreographed, and they have requirements that are usually monthly, and they have to go through a sequence of experiences, outpatient, inpatient procedures, ER, et cetera. When they don't show up, we know about it. And so across 11,000 resident positions and 44,000 people, it's very obvious when a resident is not doing their duty, and they run the risk of not successfully completing their residency program if they don't show up for these experiences. So there's every motivation on the resident's part, the program's part, and the VA's part to have them successfully complete.
Well, I've taught residents who didn't show up. And so probably, I mean, most will, but I have been there when people didn't show up. And so there needs to be, again, I think from the VA standpoint, if we are paying and they're there to take care of veterans, we should be able to document, and then the affiliate shouldn't get paid if the resident's not there.
And that is absolutely the policy, sir.
Has it ever happened?
Yes, sir.
You have not paid the affiliate?
Yes, or we have recouped money because
From the affiliate,
we could
okay.
not document.
I'm sorry, I've exceeded my time. I yield back.
Thank you. Everybody okay with round two? Okay, I'm going to defer my questions till the end and recognize the ranking member Custer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bergman. I'm going to go back to the education of our providers on opioid safety initiative, pain management, and clinical practice guidelines for chronic pain at the VA. So this is directed at Dr. Clancy. Could you just give me an update? Dr. Colenda says that there's a new wave in medical education to address these issues given the opioid epidemic across this country. Could you tie in what the VA has been doing with regard to training on these three issues? Oh, I'm sorry, there's one more, excuse me, the complementary and alternative medicines for opioids.
So in the last administration, the president issued a memorandum similar to, but not quite the same as an executive order, about reducing unsafe and inappropriate use of opioids. So I can tell you with full confidence that 98.8% of our prescribers have received training consistent with our guidelines and those from the Centers for Disease Control. At that time, we were not required to include residents in that, in part because many institutions were saying, well, we will be stepping forward with this training. I think it is actually a great time now for us to follow through on that commitment to make sure that it's impossible to finish training either at the undergraduate or graduate level without having been exposed to this, because it is a huge problem, certainly in New Hampshire, but you're not alone.
No, I think it could make a breakthrough change, given that 70% of our medical providers are doctors are trained through the VA. I think this could be literally a single step that could make the greatest difference and save lives all across this country. So I'd like to follow up with you, if we could, on that. Next, I'm going to turn to the issue. Dr. Colenda, you mentioned several programs, and I think they were all instructive for us. This is with regard to what the VA can do to recruit and retain new physicians. You talked about J-1 visa waivers, student loan repayment through the National Health Service Corps, and a partnership with Public Health Service to place medical officers in VA clinics. Could some of these programs or other initiatives be used at the VA? And maybe, Dr. Clancy, if you want to weigh in, are there programs currently in place, loan repayment, waivers, that type of thing, that we could be using to fill these 45,000 empty positions?
Ma'am, let me, I'll probably hand this off partly to Dr. Clancy, but I think that there is clear evidence that with the programs, for example, the Health Professional Scholarship Program, the National Health Service Corps programs, and the the Conrad 30 visa waiver programs, they have been successfully implemented to recruit and retain folks in the specific service areas designed for those programs. For example, Army, Navy scholarships, Air Force scholarships for physicians who have an obligation to serve after they have completed their training.
So within the VA or in the
These are in the
civilian?
militaries. The VA currently does not have that type of program. So if the concern for the VA is to look at their workforce in the future downstream, these are programs that can be developed to help assure that type of commitment post-training.
And that would require legislation to set those up? I mean, I'd like to work in a bipartisan way to pursue that.
I would imagine yes.
Okay.
Now, in terms of the value proposition for that, I think that medical students, as you probably know, incur a tremendous amount of debt, and the loan forgiveness programs that are available can also help with incentivizing folks to work in public service. Let me put it that way. In a way that could be better maximized moving forward. So you have the undergraduate approach and you have the postgraduate approach, and I think combined together you could see a long-term benefit for innovative ways of helping.
I'm just going to cut you off because my time is very short. If Dr. Clancy has anything to add about the VA with this recruitment and retention, or I can follow up offline.
I have good news, and I may want to follow up with you on additional authority for the kind of route that Dr. Colenda just mentioned, where instead of having people who go to the uniformed services, the military medical school, going into the services, that there would be a number of slots where people could come to VAs. So we will follow up with you on that. The really good news is a lot of these other programs that have supported the training of people through the National Health Service Corps and others, VA facilities are now going to be an opening opportunity for that's where people can do their payback.
Excellent.
So we think, and that's very recent, so we're excited about that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Poliquin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We're going to try this again, Dr. Clancy. Okay, here we go. All right. There is research performed for our great veterans to make sure we keep them healthy, both at the VA and at organizations outside the VA that they use, like Harvard. Okay, great. Now, we talked about these investigators. I think I understand this a little bit better now. An investigator is an employee of the VA paid by the VA, correct?
Yes.
Might that investigator also have employment or co-employment at an outside institution?
Absolutely.
So this investigator could be an employee of Harvard.
Yes.
And is part of his or her compensation at Harvard in part dependent upon how much research grant money they get?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Now we're getting somewhere.
Yes.
All right. So let's see if I understand this correctly. An investigator who's an employee at the VA and an employee at Harvard applies to not the VA, but to the National Institute of Health or the Department of Defense for a $3 million grant, right? Okay. And someone has to administer, not do the research, but do the management, administer that grant. Is that correct?
Yes.
Could that be Harvard?
It could be Harvard. It could be one of the not-for-profit
Okay, it could be Harvard, right?
Yes.
So this gentleman or this lady who's an employee of the VA and the employee of Harvard can apply for a grant from another taxpayer pot of money, this time coming from the NIH or the DOD. His or her employment could be a function at Harvard of how much grant money they bring in, and this individual is in the position of rewarding that administrative fee back to Harvard. Is that correct?
Yes.
It is. And what roughly is the administrative cost to do that? What would Harvard charge to administer a grant from the NIH?
Harvard and all other universities have a negotiated indirect rate with all federal funders.
Could it be as much as 50 or 60%?
Yes.
Oh, it could. Could it
Harvard's is, I'm sure Harvard's is more like 70.
Oh, 70%. Okay, so let's just roughly say it's two-thirds. So a $3 million grant from the NIH, which is another pot of taxpayer money, supposed to be helping our veterans here, can be redirected back to Harvard, who charges about two-thirds of the cost of the whole grant. So about $2 million of the $3 million can go for overhead back to Harvard, where $1 million is left to do the research.
No, no, no. The 2 million comes on top of the 3.
On top of the 3?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And that's been the subject of some debate here in other
Okay.
committees.
Do you see this as a conflict of interest?
Well, before we get there, can I just make one caveat?
Quickly.
All right. Having not been clear enough before, some part of that money would also have to come back to VA. So if this person getting a grant from Harvard, also a VA employee, is working with VA people and enrolling veterans who are served by our system in their study, then some of those indirect funds would come back to the VA.
Okay, let me ask you this, Doctor. Why wouldn't the VA, who has a nonprofit that I believe these nonprofits at the VA was specifically set up to administer this overhead in 1998, in 1988, is that right?
I thought that as well, Congressman. They actually had a broader purpose, which is to be a flexible funding
Okay, can the
vehicle.
VA administer these grants coming from the NIH or the DOD? Yes or no?
No.
They can't?
Some of them just depend on the affiliate to do it directly.
Okay, so there's no entity, there's no nonprofit entity affiliated with the VA that can do this administrative work?
83 of our facilities that have university affiliates, 84, excuse me, also have a not-for-profit corporation.
Okay, so there is a VA-type entity that can do this administration?
Yes,
Don't
but
you
not
do that-
all of our
excuse me,
VAs who
don't
do
you
research
ma'am?
do that.
Isn't that what your entity does?
I'm in Boston. I know full well, and yes.
So you could do this administration?
Uh-huh.
Okay, and are you an employee of the VA?
No, I'm an employee of the VA nonprofit.
Okay, okay, but some of this money would recycle back to the VA. You're affiliated with the VA, correct?
100%.
Okay, all right. Now, my question is the following. Will somebody tell me that this is not a conflict of interest? You have an employee of an outside entity and an employee of the VA at the same time, where this individual is given the authority to apply for taxpayer funding from another outside entity, taxpayer funding, in this case, DOD or the NIH. They can redirect that money to the entity they work for in addition to the VA. And, excuse me, and their tenure or their success at that university is in part dependent upon how much money they can direct back to that institution. Somebody tell me this is not a conflict of interest.
Thank you for your question, Congressman.
Yes.
Having been at Harvard for 20 years myself, this speaks directly to me.
Are you an investigator?
I was an investigator.
Great. Okay, now I finally got an investigator. Okay.
So on both sides, there are incentives to put the grant through the VA, and there are incentives to put the grant through the VA nonprofit, and there are incentives to put it through the academic affiliate.
Mm-hmm.
At the VA, you get additional, so in addition to your grant funding, so let's say bring in $1 of grant funding at the VA will supplement that with what is called VERA dollars, Veterans Equitable Resource Allocation dollars. And in fact, I get more VERA dollars if I put it through the VA nonprofit. Also, my promotions happen at the VA. I've just signed off on promotions. So there are a lot of factors that may, in fact, you do get benefits at the VA for putting your grants through the VA. The nonprofit may get me somebody to work for me. At academic affiliates also perform some of the overlapping functions of the nonprofits. Academic affiliates actually employ people who work at the VA as well.
Mm-hmm.
Academic affiliates also.
What does it cost to do this administrative work at the VA nonprofit as compared to what it costs at Harvard? And by the way,
Yep.
I love my 4 years at Harvard. I'm not picking on my alma mater. I'm just using them because they're the high-priced folks in the room, right?
I don't think they'll take it personally.
Okay. So is it cheaper to have the administrative done at the VA nonprofit as compared to an unaffiliated nonprofit at Harvard?
Well, so just like it's
Yes or
cheaper
no?
to eat at a cheap restaurant, and it's more expensive to eat at.
Yes or no?
It's what you get for it.
Okay, so the administration is different. It's not the actual work that's going on, it's the overseeing of that work.
It's what at the academic affiliate, you get access to libraries, additional laboratory space. That's what goes into overhead cost calculations. The
But isn't this
nonprofits don't have
research,
libraries.
research being done at the VA in our own labs? Could it be done at the VA in our own labs at the VA?
So sometimes yes, sometimes
Right, the
no.
investigator might be doing the research at the VA even though that individual is still employed by Harvard, right?
Yes.
Okay, so does VA have a library?
The VA's library typically is not as good, for instance.
Oh, does it
as
cost a
Harvard's
lot of money to
library.
use Harvard's library? How about the Library of Congress right here in town?
You do have to have a Harvard, you do have to have a Harvard ID to use a Harvard library.
Okay, well, the investigators do, right?
Yes,
Do you have an ID when you were an investigator and you're working at the VA and at Harvard? You have a Harvard ID?
I wasn't at the VA as well. But in order to sustain those services, Harvard sustains those services through indirect costs.
How much does it cost overhead at a VA overhead operation as compared to Harvard, ma'am?
So that figure runs between 25 and 30%.
And, okay, thank you. And we just found out at Harvard's about 70, right? What am I missing here? What am I missing here, Mr. Chairman, is that we're spending 2 or 3 times as much to send money to an institution like Harvard when it could be done at the VA, and we have the folks that are working at both entities redirecting money back to the more expensive place. What the heck am I missing here? The funding of the VA has gone from $120 billion to $180 or $190 billion over 6 years. We have $20 trillion in debt. We got our vets coming back from the Middle East that need help, and we're spending money like this? What am I missing here?
Thank you.
How much more time can I have? Thank you. I yield.
Well, days, but well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pollock. And Dr. Rowe, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things that I want to go in first, and then Dr. Sanders, according to VA testimony, the VHA has the second largest funder of GME. And during the committee site visits, we learned that many medical centers are having difficulty tracking residents' rotations. In one location, this resulted in overpayment of $1.725 million. Do we have a plan to not only track the residents, but to also collect the money that's owed to the VA?
Thank you, sir. Yes. When we find out there are difficulties at a particular site, as I said before, we do site visits and we train the staff to do the right procedures according to our policies. Our policies are very specific, and some of these are actually some very basic fiscal policies, like when you get a bill, don't pay it until you know it's right, and things like that. So those are the standards we go by in OAA, and those are the standards our fiscal colleagues go by as well. I think that resident time and attendance is a responsibility of the VA, ultimately, because we are paying the invoice. And we disseminate best practices in every way we can. We train every education leader out there. We train their staff. We have regular conference calls, and we have an annual conference to try to teach them the right way to do these processes. But we're happy to go in and assist people if they are doing it wrong or we find out that.
Well, these are not our enemies. These are our partners in educating people. I mean, we're not an adversarial. That's clearly not what this is intended to be. But the question is, if the policies were all right, how do you explain a $1.7 million overpayment?
Well, truthfully, $1.7 million in a very large budget may be less than 1%.
Well, where I am and where I live, $1.7 million is still a lot of money.
It is.
And that's just one institution, and who knows what it is over a lot. And again, these are academic affiliates that the VA, for the most part, has a great working relationship with, not an adversarial relationship. I want to make sure that I get that on the record. It's not. But it looks to me like either the VA or the academic affiliate is dropping the ball somewhere, if there are those kind of disparities out there. And we don't know the magnitude of it because obviously we have a lot of them, and I want to encourage them. I mean, the medical school where I am and taught was started there because of the VA. There were 5 in the country that were started in the late 70s, early 80s that had to be affiliated with the VA. That was a specific bill that was passed. It's how it had to happen. So it's a real close relationship. As a matter of fact, the medical school is on the VA campus. So it's a positive relationship. The question is, the accounting doesn't seem to be right in some of these.
Right, I actually agree with you, sir. A lot of this is the training of what we used to call the Associate Chief of Staff for Education. Now we call this the Designated Education Officer. They're the single responsible individual at every VA that oversees all clinical trainee education and is responsible for the time and attendance procedures. When we have turnover in that role, procedures may suffer, but we are there to train and develop the proper procedures at each site.
Well, first of all, Dr. Colenda, thank you for the years that you put in. I don't know whether you were at the AAMC meeting when I spoke the other day, but I appreciate your training residents at West Virginia University for all these years and young physicians to go out and fill these spots. And certainly what I would like to work with the VA on I think Mr. Takano was talking about it, are these 1,500 slots in primary care that are not fully implemented yet 3 years into it. And that's not easy. I know finding teachers and time to do it, teaching takes a lot of time and takes time away from your clinical obligations. And it's one of the reasons that I put a bill in. We haven't figured out how we're going to fund it yet, but to provide scribes for doctors so they'll have more time to be with patients or even to teach. So I'd like to work with you all. I know I've talked to VA before about doing this. I really want to get this implemented because we have a shortage coming out there of not only doctors, but nurses and other healthcare providers in this country. My local hospital system, I was driving in the other day from to the office here, and I heard this advertisement on Fox News. I was listening to it on the way in. And this was their national news about Mountain States Health Alliance wanting advertising for nurses and paying. And I'm thinking, well, there are a lot of mountain states. Then I realized it was my hometown. It was advertising nationally for nursing personnel. And I think you're seeing the same thing in medicine. And where in our state of Tennessee, the last statistic I saw were 26% of doctors actively practicing in the state are over 65 years of age. Yes. So we have a manpower shortage that is huge coming up. So I think it's why it's critical that the VA get this done, and sooner rather than later.
Thank you for that commentary. Now, I was actually one of the deans of one of those 5 VA medical schools.
I knew you were.
Out in Texas. I think that health professional shortage is going to be an increasing problem over the next 10 to 15 years because of the changing demographics of our country. I think that the other thing as I have said is that, to me, healthcare now is practiced in teams. And and to be able to ensure that the healthcare team has physicians and nurses and other types of health professionals to deliver care to patients, whether it's VA patients, veterans, or the civilian population, is an important concept, an educational concept to have you take away, because it's not just dumping money into medical education. It really needs to be a broader platform for health professions education. I would also like to share with you and compliment Dr. Sanders for being able to take the specific questions about the billing and the transactional nature between the VA and the academic institutions for GME. On the sponsoring institution side of that equation, that is the universities and teaching hospitals, where the program is accredited, we take accountability equally important, because failure to do so not only runs problems with the VA, but also can have problems with CMS in terms of Medicare support for graduate medical education. It also has challenges as a former CEO of a health system, for my board of directors, because help me understand this GME line that is now part of the operating budget for your health system. And so this whole issue of the transactional nature of funding residency training and the accountability of such is first and foremost part of the culture of the graduate medical education experiences today. Will there be errors? Will there be problems in that? We should expect 100% precision, but when there's not 100% precision, the key element is how can we address those short changes to be able to fix the problem, because none of us want to lose our accreditation for our residency training programs. And this can get tied back to accreditation.
Just one last thing, and I appreciate you letting me go over, Mr. Chairman, but I will make you a bet that when you were the dean or head of the medical school, you wanted the GME dollars run by the medical school, and when you were over the whole system, you wanted it run through the hospital.
Well, I was more worried about the size of the pot.
I bet you were wondering about who controlled the pot, too. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Watterson, DeOrio, what type of oversight is there from VA for the NPCs?
The oversight that we are affected by is the nonprofit program oversight that happens via a triannual review. That is run out of the Office of Research and Development under Dr. Rachel Ramoni.
Okay, and what do you understand the actual role of the NPPO to be?
The role of the NPPO, as we call it, has been established as a formal oversight for developing their handbook. Sorry, I thought you were going to a different level of question, but their role is to look at how the nonprofits are effectuated by the handbook and the Title 38.
Okay. Could we assume possibly not only oversight, but working liaison as well as oversight?
The liaison piece is probably the most prominent of what we would like it to be.
Okay. Is this office, this NPPO office, and we all love acronyms,
I know.
is this helpful? Is the existence of that office helpful?
At this time, I don't believe that the processes that are happening within NPPO are being predominantly helpful, but we have NAVRAF addressed this with Dr. Rachel Ramoni, and we're hopeful that we can make changes, and we have offered her basically some strategic plan initiatives for that. I independently did that with her directly.
So you're working with her. What are some of the impediments this office places on the NPCs right now?
Well, I think that one of the major issues that we're having right now is the fact that the type of recommendations that we're getting, especially in these triennial reviews, are inconsistent with that of our financial independent auditors. And we have many audit types of, you talk about the alphabet soup, IRS, GAO, OPM, DHHS, ONR. These are all people that I have to, as a VA nonprofit, address as an audit type of relationship. The NPPO recommendations can be inconsistent with those that are given by all of these other auditing agencies. When that happens, there's not a formal appeal process at this point in time, and we find that that's a real impediment for us to go forward and be effective as VA nonprofits.
So just to repeat what you said, there is no formal appeals process in place.
There is no formal appeals process at this time, yes.
Okay. Dr. Ramoni, are you aware of the issues that we just talked about here? And if you are, what is being done to address them?
Chairman Bergman, thank you very much. The health of the nonprofit corporations is essential to the health of the VA. And so one of the earliest contacts I made was with Mr. Rick Stars when I took this role as Chief Research and Development Officer. I was very troubled to hear of these stories, these complaints from the nonprofits. I've of course heard of good reviews, stories where we've been supportive, but I've heard comments like those of Ms. Watterson DeOrio. And so we've decided to pause the reviews of the nonprofit corporations for a period of a month so that we can conduct an internal review. We'll be reaching out to the nonprofits and to the VA medical centers, accompanying them in order to get their feedback on this process. And we look forward to establishing a truly collaborative relationship with the nonprofit corporations while maintaining our role to ensure that they have proper internal control so that they can be healthy nonprofits.
Thank you.
And we would be happy to keep you informed as this progresses.
You were reading my mind. Saved me from asking the question. Number one, thank you to all of you serving as witnesses today. Your perspectives, your experience are going to provide us with insights to better work together with you, to provide the oversight, if you will, that we are required as a committee to do, and we are all in this together. In case anybody hasn't realized it, we are in some very interesting is not the right word, but tough fiscal times. And there's going to be tough decisions that have to be made, and by partnering together, we'll be able to do that. But we will not sacrifice the quality or the advancement of care for our veterans. No excuses will be offered, no excuses will be accepted. So you are now excused. Budgets are tight in the current fiscal environment, which is one reason why we conduct the thorough oversight over VA and encourage it to be not only a good steward, but a forward-thinking steward of taxpayer money. Yet time and time again, we find examples of VA doing just the opposite. We've had some interesting questions and responses here today. Not having enough or any oversight or accountability regarding money intended for veterans. I hope that the VA has heard our concerns and will work to improve its oversight over the GME program. I hope that they will put processes in place to ensure that time and attendance of residents before paying the affiliates. I hope that VA will ensure that when research is being performed in a VA facility, that the VA NPCs are administering the funds so that VA does not pay excessive overhead costs without getting the benefit of reimbursement. Today, VA has heard many of the great benefits that NPCs can provide, and I strongly encourage them to take full advantage of these benefits so that the research can thrive and the veteran will receive the benefits. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. Without objection, so ordered. Again, the witnesses are excused. I would like to once again thank all of you and the audience members for joining in today's conversation. With that, this hearing is adjourned.